This is the virtual interest group meeting of the Concept to Consumer Interest Group. And today we will be hearing from a past president I'll introduce in just a minute about his new book on color. So thank you for everyone for being here. Just a couple of housekeeping. This is your session. Everybody who's in here, thank you for joining, and whatever interest you have, we hope that you are able to get out of it what you want to get out. Martin has assured me it's okay to interrupt when he's going through his portion of the presentation. So if something comes up and you want to ask a question, feel free to chime in. In this case, we did say ask your questions or make comments by speaking up. I'll try to monitor who might want to chime in. We have been asked to record this session, so if you don't want to be recorded, please mute your webcam and participate via the chat function, but it will be recorded. With the housekeeping out of the way, what we're here to talk about today is a book just released called Color from Concept to Consumer. It's a comprehensive resource to provide in-depth insights on some theoretical color perception, color control across the supply chain. Whether you're a designer, colorist, manufacturer, interested in working in color, the book will be of vital interest. There's a QR code here, if you like. It will take you directly to the AATCC website where it may be purchased for a very excellent price, excellent value. I'm taking credit for being the first purchaser of the book since it's released. So I don't think anybody, Maria has told me she would not dispute that, but I'll have to certainly get my copy signed. Yeah, take a look at the link. It's available to be purchased. The name of it is Color from Concept to Consumer. And so what better topic? We have the author here to speak about it, Dr. Martin Bide, textile scientist, retired from URI. I used to do something like this by saying, and a man who needs no introduction, and then give no introduction. But I'll give a little bit of the background. I think most people know. Textile scientist, retired from University of Rhode Island, taught undergraduates in fibers, dyeing, printing, environmental impact. He's worked across many disciplines, exploring pollution prevention, infection-resistant finishes, etc. Past president of AATCC, former editor-in-chief of AATCC Journal of Research, multiple awards from AATCC, and I'm sure others. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Bide to discuss his new book.
Thanks, Chris, very much. For some reason, I don't have the take control thing, so you're going to have to flip my slides.
Certainly.
So little bit. Well, first of all, hello everyone. A lot of names I recognize, some I don't. For those I don't recognize, good to meet you. So a little bit of background about how and why this book came to be. Next slide. Obviously, we're sitting within AATCC, and a big part of what AATCC does is to share knowledge. And as we all know, we have seminars, workshops, conferences, and all those things. But AATCC is also involved with publishing stuff that can be available offline, as it were. Next slide. Actually, I do have I have the control now.
Excellent.
So the way I want to do this is just to look at how AATCC has kind of grown up and how I've grown up alongside it. And even in the comparatively recent past, AATCC has been publishing some pretty highly technical stuff. And that blue book, you can't read the spine, but it's a whole book about dyeing vat dyes. A whole book from Dick Asplund about textile dyeing and coloration. But again, I've got a couple of quotes here. That first quote is, dyeing theory and how reactive dyes work. And you've got to be pretty deeply involved to find that kind of detail informative and interesting. And even when we get to color science, I mean, there's a a screenshot there of an excerpt from a color science book, and there's a lot of math involved there. So that's where AATCC has been. And as we're here today, we recognize that AATCC has changed considerably from an audience of mainly dyers, printers, finishers, and textile chemists and detailed color scientists to those with broader interests in the textile supply chain, particularly designers and merchandisers, as reflected in these images of our design and merchandising competitions for students. So we have C2C. And if I look at how I've changed over the years, I grew up in the UK and found an undergraduate degree called color chemistry, which ended up being about dyeing. And I'm so old. When I was an undergrad, our university got its first computer. It was one computer. It lived in the basement of the library, had terminals all over the campus. But some of my professors were color scientists who used that computing stuff to do some of the early work with color science. I got my PhD. I worked in the dye making industry for a while, and then came to the US at UMass Dartmouth, the concrete jungle that you can see on that picture, where I was still heavily involved with the highly technical stuff of teaching textile chemistry type courses, and had colleagues who did weaving, yarn spinning, testing. If you were an undergraduate in those days, you might have 2 semesters of yarn, for heaven's sake. So more recently, I moved to the University of Rhode Island. I was there for almost 30 years. But the department I went to join was called Textiles, Fashion, Merchandising and Design. A lot of majors because fashion's a popular subject. But the interest is very much in the fashion end of things more than the chemistry end of things. So my teaching became more broad and less technical. And I was trying hard to make it relevant and interesting to those students. And my key mantra at the start of the semester was to tell them that I'm not trying to turn you into yarn spinners or dyers or weavers. If you happen to be sat on next to someone on a plane and they happen to be a dyer, I'd hope that you could spend a couple of hours having an interesting conversation with that person. So while I was at URI, I was teaching courses. All the majors had to take a basic textile course, understanding fibers, yarns, fabrics, dyeing, and so on. We had a lab where they did some color fastness testing, fiber ID. We did some more advanced textile testing with some statistical stuff in there. The real interesting one was the color science. This was not color science in the highly detailed sense. It was a very simplified undergraduate course that was open to any major, and it would count as their science elective. And this is reflected in the subtitle of the book we're talking about today. A lot of students would say, oh, I need a science elective, color science. How hard can color be anyway? The answer is, as we all know, fairly complicated. And here we have part of the issue of trying to find a book that would deal with all the bits and pieces of color in a simple kind of way that I was trying to do. So the book you can see on the screen there at the top actually was the only one that covered those aspects and those bullet points, you know, the light object observer stuff, how you communicate color as it occurs in nature and technology, and color psychology. It covered those things, but it's kind of old, and sadly, it was in black and white. And at this point, I'm going to start to acknowledge that a lot of people, most of them involved with AATCC, over the years have been very, very informative, helpful in helping me understand how to communicate these things. And the illustrations at the bottom of that slide are the stuff that the instrument makers, the color instrument makers, would issue to their customers. And those are excellent resources just for that little part of the subject. I carried on teaching dyeing and finishing. Dyeing is fun anyway, but again, these were not students who were going to be dyers. A lot of the fun ones were grad students who were going to be textile conservators who needed to understand how to dye pieces of fabric to match something they were trying to repair. So that's me then through now. And again, now we have AATCC with its C2C interest group who have a need, as far as I can figure out, not for so much technical detail, but still need to understand and communicate stuff in the areas of color and dyeing. So just before I'm retiring in 2021, I have all the pieces in place for those various courses I've taught to try and take the key elements out in very, very simple form and assemble them into one book. And given COVID and pressures on my time, pressures on the time of the AATCC staff who've been helping me put this together, it was a slow and gentle process to get this into final form, but here we are. We have the book, and there's the book, and there are the pieces that make up the book. And I think now we're going to start wandering through the book at key pages and trying to see how we do. I'll take any questions now, and as we wander through the book, I'm happy to be interrupted and try and see if I can answer anything.
Yeah, so what we're going to do now is Martin has selected some pages from the book to go through and talk a little bit about what the topic is, not necessarily take it in depth unless there's something that you want to talk more about. So if you would confirm that you're seeing the title page of the book right now. Is that what we're seeing?
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I will take it to, there's a selection of, I don't know, 10 or 15 pages here, and I'll start with the first one that you wanted to go to, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, okay. Well, anything that starts with color always starts out with the idea that it's comprised of light, object, and observer, so that's right there up front. Some things that tend to get left until much later, the idea that we have colors that change when the light changes. Well, all colors do that. So right here on an early page is an example of color inconstancy. And the idea that if I'm trying to specify a color, just waving a piece of fabric around is not going to be very helpful. I've got a question up there. Someone who's interested in the chemistry aspect of color, but didn't take it in college. Let me take that under advisement. I'll find something for that. If we can record that question, that's going to take me a little bit of thought. So
Definitely, we'll capture that.
Yeah, I'll keep
Good.
going. So again, light object observer, the following pages go through each of those aspects of color in more or less detail. I think we're going to skip now to page 7. So again, various different sources of light. So here we have the light emitting diodes, LEDs, but the previous pages we've got fluorescent light, incandescent light, daylight, and all those kinds of things. And then the next little section that starts on that page, how do we compare different qualities of light, and how do we have standard lights, standard light sources, standard light light boxes to look at color under. So again, you can see the idea of the layout of the page and just the subjects we're trying to do. Or the next one. So light object observer. This is the top of that page is the last part of the object, looking at reflectance curves and spectrophotometers to measure them. And next section down below there, the human eye, the brain, how we see color, how it gets to the brain, how we can be fooled. And I think if we go to the next one, we get into color vision deficiencies. Why do some people not see color the way that the average person does? It's some interesting aspects, and I'll give Rolf Cooney a shout out here. If you look at those two diagrams or pictures at the top of the page, they're the same series of grays, but there seems to be a jump in the progression that differs in each set, and that's because of the background. So we look at some background effects and how they affect the way that we see and judge color. The red, green, blue graph there, that's how normal color vision people vary. So that's an overlay of a bunch of measurements on individuals. And again, even normal color vision people have some significant variation among them. Okay, next one. So then we're trying to communicate color. There's a whole section on communicating color, which we can do with words, not very well. We can do it comfortably, but not always very accurately by having colored samples. And we can do it with numbers. So again, the top of that page is looking at some of the sample systems for communicating color and the limitations. And then the bottom of that page begins the section on using numbers to communicate color and color difference. And I won't show them to you, but the following pages kind of just go through a little bit of history about how we got to where we are now with color and numbers. And even though we've come a long way, we still go back to the 1930s for the roots of everything we do with color and numbers. So if you ever hear of X, Y, and Z as color determinants, the roots of those are briefly, and I hope understandably, explained in the next couple of pages. And then we go into LAB, LCH, all these letters that translate into aspects of color. Okay, next one. So, so there's the whole first part of the book is about color, how it comes to be and how we can describe it, communicate it. Then we get into the textile section. So this is a page on fibers. We have a layout of the different fibers: natural, regenerated, synthetic. How we name fibers, how fibers get labeled in garment labels, some of the pitfalls that we can fall into, and some of the confusions. And in practice, why people might choose one fiber over another. So, moisture absorption and strength and so on. Question from Michelle: what can you do when we see a color one way and our customer is seeing it another way? Are you standing side by side, or are you probably not? So at a rough first stab at that, I'd say if you have a way to get the color numbers, if you can measure that color and derive a color and see if it matches something that it's supposed to be matching or not, if the numbers tell you it's redder or greener, and that whether that corresponds or not to how you and your customer are seeing something, that might be helpful. Margaret, thank you for that comment. It's a very short section, but again, I think this book runs at about 85 to 90 pages. So trying to cover stuff that I could probably get a foot of bookshelf that would cover all these things. So yeah, it's been compressed right down, but I hope it's, if you find something in this book that you think is interesting, I think we have a reference section that's pointing you, if you need more details, here's where you need to go. So fibers, variations, and so on. Let's skip to the next one. So fibers, there's a little bit of stuff on yarns, and here we get into fabrics, woven fabrics, and how they vary. You can put different yarns in there, different colored yarns in there, different weave structures, different weights of yarn, and so on. So that's just how all these fabric variations occur. There's some weave patterns there. And then after that, the next few pages are about knits, non-wovens, other constructions. But again, this is a very short section on textile fibers, yarns, and fabrics. But I guess, I hope, enough to help in this whole thing. Let's go to the next one. So, okay, we've got the textiles. Now, if we're going to make them colored, we need to have some colorants, dyes and pigments. So we explain how pigments and dyes differ, when you might use pigments on textiles, not so often. Most of the time we're using dyes, and comparisons of natural versus synthetic, different chemistries of dyes. Again, there's no chicken wire in here, which was a temptation I avoided. Again, this is, given my background, I'm happy with all the benzene rings and things, but this is not for this audience, I don't think. So this is just a description of the dyes in general. And if we skip to the next one, we go through the different dye types, reactive dyes, acid dyes, and here's the section on dispersed dyes used for dyeing polyester and acetate, and some of the things that differ among the various dispersed dyes. Let's skip to the next one. So we've got the textiles, the dyes, and now we're going to put them together, dyeing processes. So the middle diagram on this page is just my collection of all the ways that people can refer to a dyeing method: acid dyeing, batch dyeing, continuous dyeing, and so on. So the language can get very confusing. So again, part of my goal was to try and untangle some of this and maybe give you a good enough ear that if someone starts talking about vat dyeing, they're talking about the kind of dye they're using rather than dyeing in a vat. So again, untangling is part of the goal here. And the bottom part there is, well, let's look at the ways we can apply dye. We can put it all in one tub, stir it up, and have a batch dyeing, or we can run fabric through a series of devices continuously and have continuous dyeing. So there's a broad part there about dye application. Next one. And then we get into the individual dyeing machines. If we're dyeing yarn or loose fiber or fabric, we have different kinds of machines that again give their names to things like jet dyeing or jig dyeing. And so here's some diagrams of how those machines work and what kind of fabrics they tend to be useful for and what their limitations are. And then we get into printing. So again, all the different printing quote methods. A lot of different language to untangle there. And then the last two you can see on that page: heat transfer printing, burnout printing, otherwise known as Deborah printing, and how the design is achieved. And we have blotch dyeing, direct printing, blotch printing, resist printing, discharge printing, and so on. So running through the printing methods and including, of course, inkjet printing. Next one, Chris. It's not an obvious part of the color creation, but fabrics get finished. And this is a quick overview of the kind of finishing that tends to happen. And what I'm pointing out here is that it can affect the color. So maybe you judge the fabric color-wise as it comes out of the dyeing machine, but if it's going to go through a finishing process, the color may start to get altered. So small section on finishing. Next one. And all these bits and pieces in the book, I hope, get put together in this section here, where we try and trace a color from the mind of a designer as it goes through someone whose job is to communicate that color to a dyer how they can negotiate whether the color's right or not, from a lab dip through to large scale production. So I'm trying to imagine events and conversations in a design studio, in a brand, as they try and work on a season's colors, and again communicate that out to a dyer. Next one. And lots of things to discuss. So I think we've skipped about 3 or 4 pages here, but eventually we get to the point of trying to have a full scale dyeing. And that herringbone diagram just tells you how many things can alter the final color that appears on the fabric. So the dyer is trying to control lots of things. And without intending to do so, I'm trying sometimes to have you feel a little bit sympathetic towards the job of a dyer, as well as getting the right color, which has a lot of factors in terms of dye choice, how many dyes do I keep in my color kitchen, and so on, through to making sure that things are level, are fast, and I'm still making money. And ultimately, I've done my dyeing job, and we have to decide if it's good enough or not. And then there's a whole bunch of conversations there, and the question about my customer and me see color differently. Who's right? Next page. So the levelness issue. I mean, sometimes you can see spots and streaks, and sometimes we have a roll of fabric, and if you cut a piece from one end of the roll or the other end of the roll, you find out you have 2 different colors. Which color was sent to the customer? So there's a whole section there on levelness and how it affects things. Next one. Sustainability. Again, this is a very short section. It's, I think, just bullet points. I have opinions about what sustainability means. Again, that's a short section. We can discuss that when you read the book. Question: solution dyeing, master batch compounding. Part of your I'm dealing with solution dyeing. It's the main use of pigments to color textiles. It's, if I cut to my bottom line on that, it's a very efficient way to put color into a textile. It's making the color choice early, and I'm not sure what it is these days, but there's several months, if not a year, between the spinning of a fiber and it appearing on a store shelf. So if I put the color in a year ahead of time, I'm making that decision. And if I make 5 colors, all my downstream operations have to have all those colors in stock. If I dye the fabric, I can hold white fiber, white yarn, white fabric, and then make the dyeing decision later. So that for me is the limitation of solution dyeing. Fastness is wonderful. Again, it's a very efficient process. Michelle, recommend plant dyeing. I assume that refers to using natural dyes, but broadly speaking, I'm sorry, I'm a dye stuff chemist, and one of the pages in this book really lays out that if we're there were very good reasons for dyers of the late 1800s to all virtually jump from natural dyes to synthetic dyes, and they've continued to do so. And I really don't see that there's a future for large-scale natural dye operations. It's an interesting niche. The chemists before synthetic dyes were so clever to tweak the processes to get those dyes to produce some wonderful colors, and they were fast onto fabrics. And I admire them tremendously. But in terms of efficiency and range and dyeing all the polyester we have, I don't think there's a large-scale future for natural dyes. So anyway, that's the run through the book.
Martin, we had an earlier question about grayscale, and if I'm reading it,
yeah,
there was a question about using the grayscale and someone who had used it and scored low in the grayscale test, but also just the use of it. What comments do you have on the use of grayscale?
Grayscale for color fastness,
I
measuring color.
believe, yes, I believe that's the nature of the question.
It's the standard thing to do. I mean, that's the way we communicate color fastness because, so I cover this twice in the book. Once is just grayscales as a way of communicating a color difference. And the color difference will be between the unstained and the stained, or the unwashed original and the washed original. So we're looking at a color difference. But grayscales are different, unusual, because the size of the differences at low grayscale numbers are quite large. So they're a kind of special case of looking at samples as a way to assess color difference. And also we're doing color fastness. So yes, we need to be able to communicate how much staining or color loss took place. And grayscales have a long history. We've adapted instrumental measurements to be able to reproduce what grayscales do, and it's more than just a delta E measurement. But yeah, they're there and they're valid. We're jumping around. Did I cover that question okay?
No, I think so. You hit on a couple of the comments that are going on about doing the visual evaluation for color fastness, but then also the instrumental tools that can be used as an aid to that. Yeah.
Right. And I heard, as we came into this meeting, I heard Kerry say she has a statistics test this afternoon. I hope anyone who's doing this is looking at the test method and looking at precision and bias statements and other things at the end. Color fastness tests are a lot less precise than dyeing's are. If a bunch of people do the same color fastness test on the same fabric, their results are going to vary, and the assessment, especially if it's visual, is going to add an extra layer of variation there. So when we're into specifications and is this fabric fast enough? And you know, the standard is a 3.5 and it comes out as a 3. Whether that difference is statistically significant or not, answer, probably not. So we need to be careful when we're interpreting grayscale results. Color fastness, yes, it's in the book. Yeah, I think I'm making the points right now that I think are pretty much sure I'm covered in the book. If we cover that now, I'm going to jump back to how do we dye while staying sustainable. Several things. There's the making of the dye, and those are all petrochemically based dyes. Well, like fibers, we might think about biosourcing the raw materials from which we make dyes. When we apply them, we use usually water and auxiliaries. We have the technology to be able to treat a dye bath and clean it up enough to be able to reuse it. It's expensive, it's not cheap. And here we have some of the cost factors that are driving a lot of the decisions about what goes on in the whole color supply chain. And again, through the book, you know, I've said, well, cost is a factor. Well, of course, cost is a factor, and the cost is a factor here. So we can dye a lot more cleanly. I hesitate to say sustainably. We can dye a lot more cleanly than we do right now. And I still think that if we insist on color, we have more efficient ways to do it, and we're going to do it, I think, with synthetic dyes. Is that a comment, Kanti? Just people, yes, color vision is important in those who are making color judgments. Yep, I absolutely agree with that.
So I was just taking it back to the index here of the book, what we've done so far, and thank you for going through that as a selection. Obviously, there's a lot more topics than we've just gone through, but just while we have Dr. Bide here, if there's any other topic that someone wants to ask a question about, we've got the author, the guy who wrote the book, you could say.
And I should say that I'm not receiving any royalties from this. So
Okay.
This is all going straight to ATCC.
Good. So, and the version that I'm looking at is a PDF version. So obviously you can search on things in the PDF. You've got the index for the chapters. So actually, I'm sorry. Here's the actual table of contents here. Color, textiles. We've taken a small selection through each one of these: colorants, dyeing processes, printing, finishing, an important aspect. And then the journey from designer to fabric, sustainability, and a couple of appendix topics, references, etc. So if there's any other questions, we really wanted to give a good overview of the type of book that it is, the reason that it was put together, the resource that it is. We know that education is such an important aspect of what we're all doing, and anytime you have the opportunity to have a new book, even on some topics that aren't necessarily new, it's great to see it from a different angle and from a different perspective as the industry has evolved and the roles within the industry have evolved. But I'll keep the floor open for any other questions. If you want to unmute, you can ask verbally. We can use the chat.
Elaborate on color development, lab dips to color approval using color computers as opposed to human color approval. Again, this has been a quick skip through, and I do kind of walk through that process. There are enough variations in terms of who's driving the bus, there are designers, there are color teams, and there are sourcers who might try and source a color from a particular dyer because it's cheaper, even though the color team or the designer aren't going to get what they want. So there's that part of the approval, and then the dyer has to generate the color and the fastness, and may lie. Not everyone's totally honest here about can I meet that fastness? Can I do it at that cost? So yeah, there's several pages where I try and anticipate the kind of compromises that people have to either be honest about or obfuscate about. But there are undoubtedly those compromises. Color computers are a great help. Not always the perfect answer. I think one of the examples I give is that if I can predict a color match with my 40 different dyes and come up with a perfectly non-metameric match, but it involves two dyes that really don't play well together in the dye bath. So I'm risking all kinds of awkward consequences of unlevel dyings if I try and meet that lack of metamerism. So again, there's color computers help, but again, this is one of the things that I think the book tries to cover in terms of it's not a straight path. It's not everyone knows we're on the same page. There are nooks and crannies and corners and awkward places. We just try and recognize that they're there.
We have a hand raised. Steve, if you want to ask your question, and then we'll get to the other question in the chat.
Sure. So I have a question about light. So most modern light sources have a fairly narrow wavelength range. A true D65 or A illuminant goes from a little bit into ultraviolet to sort of long wavelength red. How much do you think it matters in assessing color, sort of the light aspect of assessing color, if we have this constrained wavelength range, and do you believe we really need the full wavelength range?
I'm going to duck that question and really say that the main aim is to try and judge the color in as close a light as possible to its intended, where it's intended to be seen. Well, that's going to be seen in a store. And there's a whole lot of studies about store lighting and how much it varies. It's going to be seen in real life when someone wears it. So really the judgment should be under those conditions. And now I'm going to confess that I'm not sure what you mean by wavelength constraints in light boxes.
Okay, so in old style light boxes, a true D65 lamp went from 365 nanometers to 780 or something like that, quite long. In some of the newer boxes, it's constrained in part because commercial light sources that are lumen based try to push things in toward the green area. So they tend to chop off the violet and ultraviolet range, and they chop off the long wavelength red. So if you go outside and look at the object, it's not going to look like it does in the booth unless you have that full range. Well, I think I'm asking you.
I'm surprised, especially if you chop off ultraviolet, you're going to lose any kind of fluorescent aspect.
I agree.
Of the color. The red is probably less important. Okay. I'm just going to go back to what I said, and really you should try and have your light box do as close to what your customer or anybody else is going to actually use to look at the color. Which is a funny way of saying I don't know.
Fair enough. Thank you for the comment. No, it's fine. Thanks.
A couple of other questions, that you see in there.
Yeah. The sustainability chapter. My abiding thought on sustainability is the awkwardness of someone holding up an item and saying, is this a sustainable item? And my point is, if the world wants to make 12 of them, yes, fine. If the world wants 12 for every human on the planet, no, we can't do that. We don't have enough resources. So it's a quantity issue more than a quality issue. Within those 12 t-shirts or whatever, we can produce them more efficiently and more cleanly. So we can go down that road of being efficient and clean, but ultimately, if we try and make way too many of those things, it's not sustainable. So efficiency and cleanliness, environmental responsibility are very, very important things, but by themselves, I don't think they make the whole sustainability picture. But what are our what's in that chapter? Which fibers do we use? Well, 75% of what we do is cotton and polyester. So if we say either of those is not sustainable, we're going to have a hard time trying to find another fiber that is sustainable to replace 75% of more than 100 million tons a year. And again, the other things in that chapter, yes, we can have cleaner dyes, cleaner sources of fibers, bio sources of fibers, all those things that might get us away from petrochemicals and We can do things more cleanly, but it's going to cost. You know, we right now we give a free pass to things that are oil based. You know, we don't charge people to dig oil out of the ground beyond what it costs them. There's no carbon taxes, so again, it's cheap. It's hard to get around that. Will the colorist's job be removed by color data reading programs? No. No, we are too culturally attuned, I think, to the concept of a designer and a human liking something. I don't know if artificial intelligence is going to be good enough to like things and in a predictable way that says, yes, we can predict what's going to sell this season. So I think the colorist job is pretty safe. I don't think customers are ready to say, oh yes, you sent me these readings, I'm good with that, I'll happily accept that, and not insist on the human input. Mechanical finishes, yeah, you've mentioned them. Yes, if you raise a nap or if you put it through a calendar and smooth the surface, the color is going to change. I can't give you a way to say this is predictable. You've probably got to do it and see how much the color changes. You might have some experience to say, well, it's going to tend to be lighter, but by how much? I don't know. I don't think we can get there. Translation into Chinese. That's a very good question. Pass that over to Maria.
If there is sufficient, if there's sufficient demand, I don't see why we can't explore that.
We have translated our technical manual into Chinese before.
Yes, we've had things translated into Chinese before. So, like I said, there has to be sufficient demand because everything costs money to work on. But Courtney, if you want to talk to me offline to see if we can make this happen, I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. Thanks. I just mentioned that we could partner with China testing labs to cover that. So I can help facilitate that. 谢谢你.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And
look at this, Martin. You're going to be international.
I know. Okay.
He has been international a long time. This is not, being international is not new for him.
You're correct.
And Maria, I don't know if you have it at your fingertips, but there was a request for the link to the book. I could, I'd have to get back over to the presentation and copy it over, but do you have a link you can add in the chat here? To the page on the book or on the website? There it is right there.
Yep, in the chat now.
Flying off the shelves. Courtney, are you talking or leaving or?
My bad. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I had a question
for
Dr. Martin. Sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at the same time, but I'm actually in the process of analyzing a claim on a shading variation in a cationic heather nylon yarn, and I didn't see specific. I'm sure there's one. I know you go through the different types of fibers, but is there some dedicated information about variation in cationic, any kind of cationic chemistry and the different variations in the levels of how we measure that?
No, other than the extent to which cationic cotton, are you referring to cationic cotton?
No, cationic nylon or cationic polyester. So it's the different chemistry, yeah, component.
Not cationic nylon's kind of unusual. Polyester, it gets a brief mention, but again, that's depth beyond I wanted to go.
Okay, great. If there's something that can you connect with me separately on that? If you do have in depth on there, I would love to have you do maybe a seminar with my team. So.
Okay. I can't promise to answer all the questions, but if I can't, I know a couple of people who can.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, you can get my contact information from Maria.
Okay.
Great. So just kind of leaving the contents up here for a couple of minutes. If anybody has anything else they want to ask about, I think it's been a great session. I appreciate all the background and the selections that you've pulled out and all the questions. Thanks for the interaction here.
It was fun to put together, and I hope people appreciate it. If anyone's listening still and buys the book and wants to tell me that in a certain section I'm full of crap, I'm happy to hear that too.